Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Thank you, everybody, for appearing and coming here this afternoon. We have members of our community, we have members of our governing bodies, and it is good to see everybody out. The goal of our meeting today was for us to discuss the issues with TIF and the City of DeKalb's handling of that matter. It was a call to get a public voice together and have a discussion from everybody that's been involved that hasn't been heard from yet as far as how DeKalb City has conducted themselves. The goal of the meeting is not to attack DeKalb. The goal of the meeting is not to put DeKalb on a whipping block. The goal of the meeting is to have a conversation about taking us into a positive call of conduct and a positive that we can affect each other and our community can move forward past this. This goal is not for ugliness. This goal is not for being on the offensive. We have a slight format change to this afternoon. Originally, this was for an open meeting. We notified it as an open meeting for members of the Joint Review Board, for all taxing bodies, for any public member of our community that wanted to come forward and present. I was about 1:15. I was notified by the township, DeKalb Township attorney, as well as the City of DeKalb attorney, that they were raising Open Meeting Act's concerns over this open meeting. As a state's attorney, I don't want any body, any taxing body, any governmental body committing an Open Meeting Act violation. We had gone through the Open Meetings Act violation. We contacted the PAC last week prior to posting the meeting, and we called this as a county meeting. Interpretations could be what they would be. It is our goal to still have an open dialogue. I will present information from myself that I would have in that meeting. I will ask for any members of the public that want to comment to be able to comment here today. I don't, given what was raised to me from the City of DeKalb attorney as well as the township attorney, I would ask that specific individual members of the Joint Review Board not speak. But the point of this meeting was a public meeting to be heard from our community so that we can move forward to a consensus that works for everybody that's in the City of DeKalb, in our partner taxing bodies, for everybody that's part of our community. So with that, in the efforts of putting this meeting together today, the actions at about 1:15 this afternoon call even more for what I've been saying in our letters, that the City of DeKalb needs to conduct a forensic audit of their TIF practices. Too much has gone on, too many questions have occurred without any answer. Some could say it's smoke, some could say it's fire. I can tell you I don't know. And we need to know what is behind it. For way of history, these TIFs have been around for a long time. There's been Joint Review Board meetings for a long time. It's at the end of these Joint Review Board meetings over the last few months. So starting in September was about the first time I was made aware of a problem. That was from the school board attorney, had sent letters to the City of DeKalb regarding issues with these TIFs and misappropriation of funds or misapplied funds, funds that were potentially paid out that should not have been paid or went to different areas of the government that should have been paid. Those are all synonymous, and the process started. And from there, there was additional meetings, there was additional proposals going on. And what really got our attention is the state's attorney's office that there was certain admissions that were going on that said that over $11 million of funds were paid to administrative costs. And that was discovered and disclosed by the City of DeKalb, and it talked about different ways of how to solve that problem. And the path chosen was to put forward proposals that our entities would accept the money, $11 million, in efforts to not further look behind where that $11 million came from. As the state's attorney, and as the attorney that advises the county board, from the beginning I was uncomfortable with that. That is not a comfortable position to say, take the money, but we don't know where it came from. There was also discussions on a new TIF that was to form. This is not a conversation about anti-TIF. This is not a conversation on anti-government. This is a conversation about accountability and letting our public speak and getting the public to where they need to be and be informed. The state's attorney's request for the forensic audit is more valid today than it was at any other point because we need to know what actions led to these administrative costs being misapplied. We don't know what other costs have been misapplied. We don't know who did it and when they did it. We're not saying there's criminal activity, we're not saying there's civilly wrong, but there's questions that we need to learn from and knowledge we need to acquire from that audit. So before any further expenditures could occur, any further actions into a new TIF, we need to understand where we came from so that we can avoid that going into the new TIF. And the TIF has been unilaterally, or across the board, has been tabled for the time being. What the State Attorney's Office is asking the City of DeKalb to do is to agree to the forensic audit. That forensic audit we're asking to be conducted in a manner in which the State Attorney's Office would oversee the audit. We're asking that TIF 1 funds be used to pay for the audit, that an audit company would be selected from the State's Attorney, and those funds that are necessary to pay for the audit to be concluded be done so through the TIF 1 funds. This is so that no one taxing body is greatly overstretched. This is so the public is not harmed any further. This is so we can get the answers that are needed in going forward. Once the TIF audit would be completed, the State's Attorney's Office would compile the results and we would convene at that point another public meeting, or we have today a public press conference. But that is our call. That's how we're requesting the City of DeKalb would go forward in some type of resolution allowing those funds to be used and appointing the State's Attorney's Office to oversee that process. There's been talk about the spending, and as the State's Attorney, the dollar amounts is not what the problem is. It's been the process. It's been how did we get to this point? How are we changing millions of dollars from from $2 million to $5 million to having $11 million in the administrative costs? Every time we sit and look at the numbers, they've changed. That's the only concern for the State's Attorney's Office when it comes to numbers. Choices of how TIF dollars are spent, choices of what projects are funded, choices of how the City of DeKalb chooses to mostly benefit or to fully benefit their community through those use of the funds. I'll leave that to those that are in place with the understanding that we cannot repeat the history that we've been through. Specifically, over the last meeting that occurred, I believe it was the last city council meeting where different expenditures were discussed. What I have to say is not a reflection of any individual expenditure request. It's not an endorsement. It's not an anti-vote. What we're asking for is that the process takes the time to let the audit occur. Without having the audit, we don't know, other than what's been laid out to us. During the several months leading up to today, in discussions of resolving the TIF issue, the offer was made that the taxing bodies take $11 million, or $11.25 million. The taxing bodies sign off and say they will not investigate further any wrongdoing of the city and go forward. At the same time, it was also laid out that if the taxing bodies do not agree to that, the city will simply spend down the money and spend it so that the taxing bodies get zero. Again, this is not an argument. This is not a fight over dollars of money going anywhere. This is about doing what's right. This is about accounting for those monies, doing the audit, and moving forward. And so with any additional talks of monies, I would invite actually Gino Galuzzo from the school district if he'd be willing to discuss some of the proponents that has been discussed with how those funds should be flowed.
Thank you, Rick. I mean, we could have some of these discussions among the intergovernmental agencies, whether with the school district or with the other taxing districts. But some of the questions that I have since I've been involved in some last discussions with the JRB in different meetings would be with regard to, now that the intergovernmental agreement's been denied on passage, is what's happening to the $11.25 million that was going to be distributed in surplus to now the reduced dollar amount. So I think some of the questions that flows in is, how do we get from the 11.2 to the new dollars, what's going to be the use of the dollars, and kind of the understanding of the theory as to why aren't those being funded with other TIF dollars that are out there. Originally, during those discussions with the intergovernmental agreement, there was going to be, and there will continue to be, dollars generated out of TIF 1 as surplus. So I guess just understanding the city's position, we recognize that's ultimately up to the city, and it's their decision as to what they do with their surplus dollars and how they use it. We certainly want to continue to respect that. As we also respect TIF 3, I understand that's been tabled till next year. So part of the discussions will be, will the city likely have an intent to move forward with TIF 3? If they do move forward with TIF 3, is there still some open discussion with regard to having surplus declared annually from TIF 3 as there was in the intergovernmental agreement? I think that's important given that a lot of these parcels have been in TIFs for in excess of 30 years. And by putting them into another TIF, they'll be locked in a TIF again for another 23 years. And that was part of the impetus to asking for that annual surplus distribution out of TIF 3 as we had in the IGA agreement. And lastly, I think there's been some discussion about an ordinance the city was going to pass for greater transparency. I think it'd be important from a taxing body standpoint that we continue to remain involved in that so that we can ensure that there's some internal policies put in place that we can all agree work better than just the language that's currently in the TIF Act, so that we can have greater accountability and greater transparency with use of dollars going forward. Those are just my only 3 points I have.
Thank you, Gino. I'd invite members from the public, if they have any issues they would like to address to myself. I'd be happy to take those answers. If there's information you're requesting that I can't answer, but a member of our county staff can do so, we would do so. And I would like to go forward at this point. There's a microphone at the back, if you want me to.
No, I just want to know who people are. You haven't stated your name, and this gentleman in front of me did not state his name. Not everybody knows you. Could you guys tell us your names and have everybody else tell us their names?
My name is Rick Amato, the DeKalb County State's Attorney. That was Gino Galuzzo. He is representing the DeKalb School District as our TIF attorney.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kurt Thurmeyer. I live at 201 Thornbrook Road in DeKalb. I'm a taxpayer for the City of DeKalb, for the County of DeKalb, for the school district, the toilet paper district, all the other districts that we have. I pay taxes to all of them, 7,000 plus taxes. And I came here because I'm very interested in the subject. As a professor of almost 30 years of interlocal relations, I find the sandbox fight really incredible. I thought I was coming to the DeKalb County Community Building, and yet it seems like I'm in Rick's Cafe at Casablanca. And I am shocked to find out that DeKalb has used some of the TIF money for administrative purposes. Over 20 years, where supposed experts who have been on this committee year after year after year, looking at the money, looking at the agreements, and now all of a sudden, we're shocked to find there's administrative money. If you want to do a forensic audit, how about on the people who were supposed to be watching and calling out these concerns over the last 20 years? That's where your audit ought to be. This, I think, is nothing more than a money grab from the school district, which can't find a property tax dollar that it hasn't found a way to spend, and grandstanding politicians who are looking for headlines. Because really, DeKalb, the City of DeKalb, by virtue of losing 9,000 plus students at NIU, has lost the population of the entire city of Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin in the last 10 years. That's a hell of a lot of people. This town is hurting. We should be in this meeting figuring out how we are going to do better, collaborating to bring back the economy. That's what we ought to be talking about. And playing nasty in the sandbox is the last thing that this community needs. And frankly, I think it's disgusting that all of you are grabbing for money that you had a chance to talk about for a long time. And we ought to just move on and focus on how we're going to work together, not throwing sand in the sandbox. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Herb Rubin, DeKalb taxpayer, 5th Ward, also with some expertise, but I don't need to do my credentials here. I have a couple of questions. One, continuing what Kurt said, we need some evaluations of the effectiveness of previous TIFs. But the question I really have for this meeting, and what the state's attorney is talking about, the need for a forensic audit, moving forward, thinking about TIF 3. We have in front of us on the agenda tomorrow night, and the DeKalb City Council meeting, a proposal to spend, to support 4 different TIF projects, being paid for out of money that's moved from TIF 1 to TIF 2, or the other way around, to handle these projects. I have a question either to the city or to the state's attorney. What are the implications of doing a forensic audit and looking more carefully, at how TIF money is spent on these proposed projects? I mean, my basic sense is they should be postponed until we actually work out some, work out some of these things. And the second question I have, I was very upset when a couple of weeks ago the city council had worked out, or staff of the city had worked out a reasonable set of proposals of how to go forward, precisely what Kurt was talking about, and getting consensus on future TIF projects. And that was tabled until January 18th or something next year, after the current TIF project. And secondly, basically in the proposals that were being put forth for the city council meeting tomorrow night, no attempts to basically follow the actual proposals that came out from the city's own attempt to set up future ways of handling TIF. And these proposals are such that they should occur even if there were no special districts. They're good ideas for how to evaluate a TIF project. And why these proposals were not actually used on the 4 proposals that are in front of them. So the basic implication is, what are the implications of what you want, what the taxing bodies want, on these 4 proposals, which in my opinion all should basically be delayed until we straighten this up and get a better sense of confidence in the city's ability to handle TIF money. So I have both a question and of course I need a little bit of a speech too. Thank you.
Mr. Rubin, in addition to answering your first question, the TIF projects, our proposal is that the audit be paid from the TIF funds. Part of the discussion today through the joint review board conversations was to get an idea of what the other public bodies felt about those projects. What the city could be doing tomorrow, they could vote and earmark the money to be spent on all those projects. They could vote and earmark the money to be spent on 2 of the projects. They could vote and say, we'll earmark the money for certain projects, but we'll wait to fund those until the audit is completed. So the options are out there. I think this is your second question of the conversations. The conversations, part of the state's attorney's request was to convene the JRB, to have those further conversations so that throughout the community they can be discussed, the benefits of them. Ultimately, the city is free to do what they want and how they spend the money. When it affects the county or the community, that's where the questions come into hands.
Michael Hajishvi. I always love this because my voice is so low. One of the things I want to point out is I personally have seen evidence of TIF misspending. Okay, it's a small amount, but it was money that was spent on the lagoon for a survey. Now, if it's $10,000 here with one city manager, maybe in the 90s it was 20, 30, whatever the spending authority was. So you're going to find areas where people said it was already slush fund to be used for personal projects, ideas that people wanted to use. The university was trying, and some of the people in town were trying to tap into TIF in John and Harrison Street area, and they were using that TIF money initially to try to run a survey on the university's lagoon. Now, that was one idea people were doing. Maybe there were other ideas out there that people were experimenting with TIF money. So I'm really concerned about long-term use of the slush fund kind of attitude around it. It was not being very well monitored. I'm sure the JRBs never got a chance to get a good shot at what the TIF money was being spent for, because it was often my guess is that they were fuzzed up. We don't tell you what we're spending it on. I mean, I've been in public life for a long time, 30 years or so. I've worked for corporations, I've worked for state entities, and it's easy enough if you want to hide something over a short period of time to do that. And the forensic audit will solve that. It will piece all this back together, and we will see where all the money went. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I'm Douglas Moore, and I've lived in DeKalb County for over 30 years. I've paid property taxes in DeKalb County for over 30 years. And I fully support the state's attorney's call for a forensic audit. To me, it just makes so much sense, and the fact that the city would resist doing a forensic audit, given the current circumstances, is just mind-boggling. So I just wanted to emphasize that I do fully support the state's attorney's call for a forensic audit.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Mark Sherbat, DeKalb citizen taxpayer. I would first like to thank the school district and its attorney for finding this issue and bringing up this issue. So this issue does definitely need to be brought up, so I appreciate the school district's effort along with the county's effort as well. Township, not so much, but I appreciate the districts that did stand up and brought this to light. And I do agree with you as far as the forensic audit goes. The city does need to move forward with a forensic audit. I do have a question for the state's attorney though. Do you think it would be appropriate for the city council to follow through tomorrow night with its request in passing these expenditures for TIF 1 and TIF 2 before the expiration deadline in an effort to not have to distribute the funds to the other taxing bodies? What's your take on that? Do you think it's a wise decision to move forward, or should we delay what the city council plans to do tomorrow night?
Mark, it's a good question. It's part of the reason the timing of this meeting was when it was, October 17th
Yeah.
at 3 p.m. We wanted the members of the JRB, we wanted the taxing members to be able to go forward. Those who have the knowledge of, are these projects valid, are they not? Was it what it could appear as, which is a complete cash dump
Yeah.
because you can, not because it's the right thing? That's the reason that we were here. For the goal of today was to get a read without making a formal answer, but a discussion point, so that would be more clear. At this point, absent further discussion, we're solely asking for the audit. The city spending, how they choose to spend that, depending on what happens tomorrow night and the rest of the year, that could be repercussions that come. I can't answer that completely.
But I do want to clarify, you are asking for somewhat of a delay in things until the forensic audit is complete.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Before we go, and please, we'll take all the public comments that wants to comment. I'm going to turn over to David Brewer, our Chief of Civil. For those that are not familiar with Joint Review Board or JRB, how that interplays, if we could explain that just to make sure everybody's understanding. Often it's easy in government or law that you talk in bigger syllables or bigger acronyms, and I want to make sure everybody has a general understanding of that before going forward. Thank you.
Hi everybody, I'm David Burrow, and as he said, I'm the Chief of Civil for the State's Attorney's Office here in DeKalb. There was a comment made earlier about the idea of essentially auditing the JRB, and that's kind of what I wanted to address, was this idea of the JRB being at fault. That doesn't quite work. The JRB is the group of taxing bodies that's been assembled under the TIF Act in order to review numbers at certain points in times and things of that sort. They're not the ones who are making decisions as far as the TIF expenditures throughout the year, and they're not the ones charged with such duties. So the concept of the JRB, let's say the JRB did something wrong, go after the JRB, well, you're not going to get anywhere with that, and it's not a body to be found accountable for somebody else's usage of TIF funds. So I just wanted to clarify that. And I also want to clarify that there's no there's been no definitive decision by anybody that anybody in DeKalb has done anything improper. What we've gotten so far is a whole lot of mixed messages. And we've gotten people in meetings for the city who have talked about, well, there's questionable expenditures for the last 10, 20 years. And when you say things of that sort, that leads to the need to audit. That brings about the question that you don't even know the numbers that you're talking about. And so I basically just kind of wanted to chime in with what Rick's been saying about the whole purpose of the audit is essentially to know what is going on because questions have been raised. People have asked us questions. People want us to do something about it. Well, you know, it's not as simple as you just call the state's attorney goes and arrests everybody. That's just not how it works. But we do have the ability, but we do have the ability to try to have a dialogue. And that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to have a dialogue between the people and the city and the county and every other taxing district. Not behind closed doors, but to actually figure out what's going on and to figure out why we have these questions that have arisen and how we can answer them. There's only one way to answer the question as to where money went, how it was spent, or if it was proper. That's a forensic audit. I'm sorry, nobody likes the term. I don't like the term, but that's how you figure it out. Now, do you think that one taxing body in here alone should be paying for that? Well, no. That's why we've asked for it to come out of the TIF funding. That's a collective. Money that would go into the surplus. That's fair. It's everybody involved in this. Now, if you want the JRB to pay for an audit, well, that's just not realistic. The JRB doesn't have to pay for an audit. A certain segment of the taxing bodies, of all the taxing bodies, shouldn't have to pay for the audit on a TIF. So I think those are a few things that I just felt the need to clarify. And I know a lot of people don't hear from me very often, but I hope that helps with the discussion on this and where we're coming from.
Yes, sir.
Dave Jacobson, I am a local resident, happen to be on our city council, first ward alderman. I find it difficult to sit in the front row and listen to some of the comments being made by some of the people in the room that know better. Effectively, what they are doing is they are preying on the anger of TIF locally in the community. They are preying on the lack of knowledge that some people have on how TIF works. And they are preying upon the fact that they can stand up here and basically tell stories and no one in the room will question them. And as long as we're in the spirit of explaining some things, let's have a discussion. So the discussion that was just had by Mr. Burrow is there's no way to find out what monies have been spent. That we need this audit to find out what's being spent and what it's being spent on. There is an annual report that the TIF is required to give that has been given for the last 23 years of the TIF. We know those numbers. We know exactly how much has been spent on management fees. There's no question to that number. There never has been a question to that number. Annually, that number has been put in front of the JRB. And while again, they are not responsible for the spending, they are the joint tax bodies that come together to review how TIF is working. And while I have sat up in my seat for the last 8 years and questioned some of the administrative expenditures, saying I felt it was too much and that we needed to be less reliant on TIF. At no point in the last 8 years or in the last 23 years did any of the taxing bodies have any issue with how the money was being spent. Well, there have been council members that have said there may be a problem here and we don't feel this is right. The taxing bodies have remained silent for the last 23 years. Now at the end, when there's a pool of funds, they are looking for a one-time, very large cash payouts to go into unrestricted budgets that they can spend. Literally robbing it from development, robbing it from the potential of TIF, and putting it into an account that they can spend it on anything they'd like to, unrestricted funds. Again, in talking about administrative expenditures, we have an attorney from the school board who has cost hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxpayer money to make these allegations. This is an investment by the school board. to go after millions of dollars in funds they can spend. Again, I think that's somewhat disingenuous when people are getting up to tell you things and act as experts from other sides of an argument. They should at least tell you what vested interests they have in that discussion. In reality, again, if an audit is to take place to discuss how monies were spent, again, I don't think there's much pushback from the council, from my understanding on that. The reality is that a forensic audit is going to tell us what we already know. We know what the monies were spent on. They were done annually. We know what management expenses that they were put towards. Maybe not individually through line items, but as an aggregate of what they were spent on. And to pretend, again, to prey on the non-understanding of several of the people in the room, the ask to delay the spending of the funds to beyond a point when an audit can occur, again, is disingenuous. The other taxing bodies understand if this money is not decided and if this money is not committed by the December 31st closure of the TIF, that they will get the full amount abated back to them as the TIF closes. So again, the discussion at the council level now is if the reality comes down to use it or lose it, and it very well may, what projects have we already vetted? Again, to pretend that these projects are now suddenly a surprise or that they've been discovered is outright fantasy. These projects have already come in front of the council. They've already been discussed. We have the backup and the vetting on those numbers. Whether I agree personally with them or not, whether other councils personally agree on those returns, the reality is these aren't projects out of thin air. We have held these projects for months in an attempt to work with the other taxing bodies to come up with a solution to progressively move forward. Their benefit is to drag their feet as long as they can till the December 31st deadline and get a whopping one-time cash payout. And that's why it's frustrating to hear some of these things. Again, the misinformation that's out there, the misinformation that's being spread both in the media and by the other taxing bodies themselves are frustrating. At no point have many of these taxing bodies agreed to reach out and have a meeting. There was a discussion at one point whether or not we can get the taxing bodies into a room. The decisions are being made by very small groups of people behind closed doors, and that's not the way to do business as far as I'm concerned, whether it's on our side as the city or with the other taxing bodies as partners to that. Going forward, the reality is we have a few days to make some decisions. And while again, we are committed to stepping up to the plate and working together with the other taxing bodies, being cognizant of the fact that they see large unrestricted dollars on the table that they may be able to stuff into their budgets. The reality is the city is tasked with the economic development of the community. I personally feel that those management fees have helped rob some of that economic development, but to surplus this back to the taxing bodies without any idea or committed funds on their side, when again, we know they're spending millions of dollars in management at their levels on very similar projects, again, I think it's fair to open the air and to have a fair discussion to get everyone in the room and do this. Great, we're here. Let's have the discussion. But let's start from a point of fairness and honesty and truth and not present one side of the story that's merely going to whip up those anti-TIFers in our community.
Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Gino Galuzzo. I just wanted to clear up some of the statements made there that I felt were inaccurate and were important when we get out. First and foremost, I think just so everybody understands what we're talking about, we're discussing the administrative fees that have been on those annual TIF reports, and this is the reason I pointed it out. They identified there's roughly, I'm just going to ballpark it, at least in recent years, I'm not going to go back too far, but in recent years, about $1 million a year, it just says transfer to general fund under the administrative identification.
Yep.
So when you say we know what the dollars are used for, we don't know what they're used for. That's the extent of what's on the report. And I agree with David from the State's Attorney's Office that it's not the JRB's position to dive into detail. I mean, they read the report that's required by the state. It's up to the city to verify that report's filled out quickly. And in fact, that's why there's certifications that the JRB relies on. So to blame the JRB is unfair. The JRB relied upon certifications from the auditor that audited. I'm sure that person relied upon certifications from the village mayor or administrator that signed it annually, that the TIF was followed. And that person likely relied on the legal representation that said we followed the TIF law. So ultimately what we're asking for now, because this came to light because a new TIF was being created, says, hey, wait a minute, just in the last few years alone, we see $1 million a year being transferred to the general fund for administrative fees. Those are dollars that could be used for economic development that everybody wants, which is why the TIF was created, to increase CAB, create jobs, eliminate blight. Those dollars weren't available, and now we're asking ourselves, as we're creating a new TIF, are we going to continue that practice of transferring dollars to a general fund that may or may not be legitimate? The law allows you to transfer funds for administrative costs, but you have to prove that those are costs you wouldn't have had if you didn't have the TIF. And when you're transferring $1 million, I'm wondering to what extent what's being done for the TIF, not for the city's general fund or their budget for issues they may need dollars for, but what specifically was that $1 million a year used for to benefit the TIF? And that's really from the taxing bodies what's important for us to understand, so that as we're going forward, that practice doesn't continue. And as we're looking back, we have some kind of accountability to say, hey, has this been an accurate and good use of TIF dollars? And has it been appropriate or proper? We agree the dollars that are currently at stake, the city can use those for economic development. There's not a lot the other taxing districts can do. The JRB doesn't improve projects, the city does. We could just say after the fact, was that a good use or not? We can go to city meetings and argue not whether those were proper uses of project dollars. Whether they used it on a lagoon or not, that was probably appropriate. You know, at the end of the day, that's up to the city council. I'm not recommending that we dive into that type of detail. But I think what is important is that everybody doesn't lose the fact that when I went to the school board meeting, this was an open meeting. I recommended to the board to sign the intergovernmental agreement to get this behind us from a public standpoint. Not to dig in, not to do an audit, but instead to move forward. That was my recommendation at the time. That being said, just so everybody understands, there's $11 million in surplus that was at stake that was going to be distributed, and now it looks like it might be $5 million, or who knows what the dollar amount is. I really don't understand what it is and how we got there. But really the issue isn't that $11 million of surplus, but the other stuff, you know, they've acknowledged the other $11 million that went to general fund. So really we should be having $22 million in the pot for economic development and or distribution of surplus. And that's why I think the state's attorney jumped onto this, and then I started getting calls and asked to come to the meeting, is that this is an issue that we should look at. We shouldn't just, as I had recommended to my board, is let's just resolve it and sign the intergovernmental agreement and move forward. So that's why you're here today. And I think it's misleading to say all the information's there in the TIF reports, because it's really not. The TIF reports are summary. And when you look at the TIF reports, you don't even know what's being paid and what redevelopment agreement it really is being paid for, because the state doesn't require a lot of detail. And you can say I've complied with the annual reporting requirements, but that's great. You've complied with the annual reporting requirements, but you still should have some backup data that says, why did we transfer the $1 million? And why was that $1 million necessary for the TIF? And had it not been for the TIF, we wouldn't have incurred that. It's really that simple.
Yes, ma'am?
Monopolis, more decades in DeKalb than I care to count, and 26 years of public service to the City of DeKalb, and 39 years as an educator. So I've been around. Democracy is a very slow and messy process that requires participation among elected officials and among the public and their elected officials. That's a basic tenet of how democracy works. This is an example of how democracy works, where people come together and talk. TIF. Who is TIF supposed to benefit? the entire community, not just the city of DeKalb, not just the school district, not just the township, not the entire community, which is why the entire community, and there are some people who mentioned some things here today that the other entities have not participated. There's an element of truth to that. Maybe the voices should have been more vocal over the years. I can't disagree with that completely. However, over the years, especially during someone's administration, the JRB meetings were intermittent. They were often postponed, canceled, and that's not a very good thing. They became just another checkbox. Oh, yeah, we had a meeting. Yep, the JRB met. Yep, yeah, we covered that. And it was not, they were not very thorough, as thorough and delving as they should have been. Who's to blame for that? Maybe a little bit of everybody. Having said that, one thing that I took upon myself and a few other people was to start communicating with the JRB on a regular basis. The only person I wasn't able to communicate with was the citizen participant because there was no information to connect with that person. But I tried to communicate with them in giving them information and sharing information, not only with the membership of the JRB, but also their counterparts who they represented. All in an attempt to get the JRB to be more accountable, more representative, more involved. And I think that did happen over a period of time because the meetings were actually videotaped, which was some kind of progress. The JRB needs to increase its responsibilities. Is that by law? Probably not. Can we do better than what the law states? I think so. Should we? You darn well better believe we better do that. And I don't see any of the entities as predators. Come on, give me a break here. If anybody has questioned TIF and how expenses for TIF have been accounted for over the years, it's my good friend Alderman Jacobson, who for 4 years during the city administration was ignored time and time again, despite the fact that you brought up some very good points. So we should continue questioning and we should continue discussing. And I'll leave you with this one other little thing. After 4 some odd years ago, and Mr. Young will remember this, the Park District will remember, there was this battle with about the Kiwanis Park battle, where a developer wanted to put townhouses there. And we went to battle with the school district at the time, various citizens, because they wanted to put townhouses on the soccer fields that had been there for 30 some odd years. A wonderful thing for the community. I mean, where are you going to find that big a space to add to the quality of life in the community for 30 plus years? And the school district's response at that time was, oh, we have no use for that anymore. So, well, it took a great deal of grassroots efforts, but we got begging people, going to different meetings, and the end result was the soccer fields were saved. They were saved because of the grassroots movement and people questioning. And yeah, I can take on the school district too, and the park district, and any other district, and we all should, if you point things out and work hard enough to advocate. But the big thing that needs to happen is you have to have discussion. And there is no shame, city, staff, mayor, and council, in having an audit. Come clean. Otherwise, you will not be trusted, no matter how hard you try. It's got to happen. Here.
Sorry for wanting to speak a second time, but Alderman Jacobson made some comments that bothered me on a personal and political level. First of all, I'm not out to get any money because I don't represent anybody. I represent myself as a taxpayer and a citizen activist. The second thing that was done, he's talking about the districts wanting to somehow get this money for their own expenditures, like they're going to spend it on cookies or brownies from Imbodens or something like that. They're going to spend it on things that benefit us all. One of the things the city in its evaluation of TIF has totally failed to do is to look at missed opportunity costs. Are we going to gain more from a TIF project than giving the money back to the school district? I've calculated over the 23 years the amount of money that we're talking about on Tuesday night going back to the school district would be sufficient to fund 1 to 2 teachers for the entire period of time in a school district that has abysmally very bad student-teacher ratios because it needs more teachers. It's not going back to buying chocolate brownies. It's going back to serve the community. The second thing that the retiring alderperson was talking about is the assumption that we have benefited dramatically from the TIF projects. I have been active in local politics longer than anybody in this room other than Steve and Bessie. And during my time when I've been in positions to ask it, I have asked for evaluations of the actual benefits of specific TIF projects. And the only thing I've been given is some anecdotes of 1 or 2 things that Pond Fisk area, for example, in which the benefits economically and socially have actually been proven. What occurs is you end up with a benefit statement when the 2 projects are being proposed, and absolutely no follow-up, minimal attempts to make sure that contracts are actually followed in detail, other than the building contracts, which are actually looked at very closely, and nobody has done an evaluation of whether or not the projects are actually worth it. And the assumption, that David was talking about was all of a sudden we spend this money and gloriously somehow in the future we end up with economic benefits. That would be wonderful. That's what TIF was meant for. But there's never been a demonstration that actually is actualized. So what I was hearing from the alderman is an overemphasis on the theoretical benefits for which TIF was meant, and then a demeaning of how the districts would spend the money. I was looking at the city, and I was having lunch with Chief Lowry today. The amount of money that would go back to the city, I was joking, would be enough to buy 2 lakes for 1 police officer. It's not quite enough to fund a whole police officer. But there are alternative uses of the money that benefit all the citizens. And so, that's why I was, asking the state's attorney, should we delay these other projects? And, what I'm hearing, if we do, the money disappears, and it doesn't disappear into frivolity. It disappears to help citizens through the opportunity costs that are omitted because the money is going into a TIF project. Opportunity costs should be omitted if you can demonstrate the projects are going to pay off. But that's never been demonstrated by the city, in the 30 or so years that I've been looking at this city. Thank you.
My name is Steve Capitan, and 24 years ago, I was embroiled in a battle over TIF funding to bring in a Walgreens and destroy the only example of Beaux-Art architecture in the entire city, and to bring in a drugstore, which didn't bring in additional revenue to the city because with drugstores and grocery stores, you're just splitting up the pie. With other retail, you bring people from outside. In any event, I have had some experience with TIF in seeing where it has worked and where I don't think it has worked. I was willing to vote against a number of TIF proposals and was unhappy with some council members in the time that I served who would just be too ready to just buy whatever is put in front of them. So my admonition is for council members not to do that. I'm not going to comment on the proposals before the council tomorrow. I just wanted to state that I'm supportive of the guidelines proposed. I think that's a very positive step. I think they should be looked at for a little tweaking because infrastructure, standalone infrastructure, can be and is an important part of TIF spending, but it should not become a crutch. And I think the reason that provision was targeted is because it has become used as relying on it for repair, ongoing, regular maintenance. If it's unique problems or it's something new, then it's appropriate for a standalone infrastructure project. But one other thing I wanted to cover is, two things. Analysis of the revenue is, as well as the spending, is critical to accountability and in making informed decisions in the future. One of the issues has come up with regard to sales tax revenue. Because of proprietary interests, we can't get sales tax revenue. And I've been asking and have not gotten a response from the city. I've asked it at a public meeting. Can we get aggregate money or aggregate numbers for revenue, something like Northland Plaza? And then it wouldn't expose the individual revenue from individual businesses. But that's critical, not just what the money was spent on. One other thing is the approaches to TIF. There are two different types of approaches. There's a broad approach where you hire a consultant to identify a large geographic district, and you try and include things like school buildings so that they can be a beneficiary of the TIF money. And then you create vague goals so that the goals are really in effect never achieved. When I first came into the council, the staff and the council always referred to TIF as, well, the TIF lasts 23 years. How many people have heard the TIF lasts 23 years? That's not true. The truth is, the TIF is only supposed to last as long as it takes to achieve the goals that you lay out and then pay off any bonds that you incurred to create the project. And then the TIF is supposed to end and go back on the tax rolls. But when you create the broad TIF, it has positives that you can include, like the schools and other taxing bodies that can benefit from that TIF. But it also creates that dependency for the city in terms of administration, in terms of infrastructure that's ongoing maintenance type of infrastructure, and it just goes on and on and on, and it becomes and can become a slush fund if the council lets that happen. And again, the temptation is there. The other approach is a narrow approach, and the example that the city did with that was the county home project. When the county home moved right here, the buildings that were on that site made that site unattractive to a developer because it would be costly to tear down the buildings. There was a dump site from the 1950s that needed to be cleaned up. The city tore down the buildings, cleaned up the dump site, and created the access to Barbara Green, the stoplight. The developer spent all of their own money on the project itself, and within, I don't remember how many years, but far, far less than the 23 years, that project was completed, that TIF district was narrowly defined, and it ended and went back on the tax rolls. So that's a positive way of doing TIF as well. So I think that that's part of the analysis that needs to be done, and the Joint Review Board needs to be more active. It's true that the city makes the decision, but that doesn't mean that the people from the other taxing bodies in the Joint Review Board can't make their voice heard and make their voice heard at council meetings when these decisions are made. Thank you.
For those of you that don't know me, my name is Misty Haji Sheikh, and full disclosure, I am on the county board. I am your public servant. But I come here today as the private citizen who stood before the city council and has asked repeatedly for TIF documentation. To give you a little history, a few years ago that was, I was looking at the website. This is prior to the last city manager, and all of the checks were listed on the website. So I could see what was being spent on, not some annual report. And now if I go looking for it, the only thing I have is the annual report and things under general funds. So I am in favor of a forensic audit. And for those of you that might not know what a forensic audit is, instead of being an annual audit that tracks what we did this year, it goes back to day one and penny one and tracks it all the way forward. And when I went before the city council, I submitted a FOIA. I never got my information. And no, I am not the only one. There's others in this room, including at least one alderman, who have asked for the same thing and didn't get it. There's been a a lack of information for the citizens on how our tax money has been spent. And so that is why I am here today. Now we can discuss whether or not we like what the city wants to do with the money. That's a different discussion. But I just wanted you to know that I'm here trying to make sure that the citizens that I deal with and that all of you, that we get an accounting for how our money was spent. As a government agency, you have to keep records all the time, for more than 20 years if necessary. You are not even allowed to destroy records unless you follow the state, or in this case, the Municipal Records Act. And so those records should be somewhere, and I think that a forensic audit is what's needed. Thank you.
Hi, you'll be glad to know that I'm not up here to air the dirty laundry of the city tax, the TIF question, or call the members of the Joint Review Board money grabbers. As a citizen, first of all, I guess I should say my name is Pam Burke, and I was briefly on the city council in 2010 and 2011. And so I do have quite a bit of knowledge about the history of the TIF districts because I was interested and did research in that. I really wish that any discussions going forward would please not call the Joint Review Board a bunch of money grabbers or accuse the city of trying to hide something. Because way back when, as the Chronopolis said, the Joint Review Boards tended to be apathetic and didn't show up at the meetings and so forth as she described. So there wasn't a real good overview of what was going on. Now, TIF 1 was actually created nearly 35 years ago. That the first part of that TIF was planned for 23 years, but it was extended for 12 years. At the time it was extended, the school district requested an intergovernmental agreement whereby the city would be returning each year 50% of the funds taken in to the taxing bodies. So all of the taxing bodies have been receiving 50% of the increment that was diverted. They've been receiving that back in surplus funds. So all the money collected has not been spent by the city per that intergovernmental agreement. TIF 2 takes in a much smaller amount of increment. So there isn't this large discussion going on about the money. I don't believe the city's trying to hide everything. My goodness, we have one budget meeting after another. Meetings on TIF. Those meetings are public, they're televised, there's minutes. The annual report that TIF that is provided on TIF is a summary. That's true. But at any time, anybody was welcome to make an appointment or just walk in if they had questions on TIF. So where do you go from here? I've never heard anybody on the city council, and honestly, my son is on the city council. I've never heard any of them saying that they object to this forensic audit. This is the first I've heard that we're anticipating that TIF 1 would pay for that forensic audit. So my last question would be, is that an allowable use of TIF funds to pay for that type of situation? And I thank you very much.
Thank you. We believe that a TIF expenditure for the accounting of the TIF would be an allowable expense under the TIF Act. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay.
I'm Mark Matrowski. Dombrowski. I'm the DeKalb County Board Chairman, and just really wanted to give a little brief talk here just about this whole situation. One is that we do want to work directly with the city, and I've got a good working relationship with Mayor Smith and, of course, Alderman Jacobson. So that's always the goal, is to be able to move past this situation, and really we want DeKalb to thrive. DeKalb's our largest municipality in DeKalb County, so as DeKalb goes, we all go as a county. So we want the development, we want all of these things to occur. We were being hampered a little bit by the fact that, you know, there's just some different confusion and issues with maybe how some of the expenditures were done in the past, to where we just wanted some clarification on that, which is why the city had kind of brought together some of the elected officials from the different taxing bodies. And we held, I believe, 3 different meetings to kind of talk about these situations, or this particular situation. In those meetings, the first one I did raise the thought of a forensic audit myself. Just say that would be a way to kind of clear the air, be something that could maybe bring some confidence back from the taxpayers and everything, that maybe it reveals that nothing was wrong, it was just you know, different issues that were spent on you know, that everything was legitimate, but then we can move forward. So there was some concerns given at that meeting just about, well, maybe it could mean that full 11.25 million wouldn't be distributed to the taxpayer, or to the taxing bodies. At that point, instead of, you know, wanting that kind of that money grab, it was, you know, that thought of, I think a lot of taxing bodies said, well, look, even if it said that we don't get any of the money, just the mere fact of being able to have it definitively say, this is all okay, this has been fully vetted through a forensic audit, and we can move forward, I'd be fine with that, because it's just would allow us to put this whole situation behind us. Because right now there's a lot of issues. If you just simply Google different TIF issues, there's a lot of cities that are in the middle of court battles over TIF and how TIF funds were spent. Even some areas where the FBI has been involved. There's different things. Obviously, that's, you know, I'm not saying anything for this case, but it's just one of those things that just led us to go, okay, well, you know, let's just clear the air and then be able to have a detailed audit or a forensic audit on this situation. So there's a few different points I want to read off here that I feel could really help us move forward, and I want to kind of address these. And this is kind of based off of just talks with, you know, the hearing different taxing bodies, what their concerns were, just kind of seeing what the city's been discussing as well. So these are points we can talk about more as we move forward, but some different things I wanted to put out there. Number one is a forensic audit must be completed and should be under the direction of the State's Attorney's Office, as was already stated, but paid for through DeKalb TIF number 1 funds. And again, that's, as our State's Attorney's already mentioned, that's because we all are a part of this. It's not just the city, it's not just school district or anything like that. Number 2, of the different projects that were proposed, we do think that there's some legitimate projects that have been proposed. For instance, the Egyptian and hometown sports project we think should remain. Those total $2,650,000. We think those are really good use of TIF funds. Those have been vetted, those have been talked about for years. Full disclosure, I used to be on the Egyptian Theater Board, and things were talked about air conditioning back then as well. And I know that the city's done a study on it and done all these different issues, so they've already made the investment. We feel it's important to kind of move forward with that as well. The hotel and fiber we think should be held off on in terms of projects. But again, that would still allow for that $2.65 million dedication to those Egyptian and hometown sports projects, with the stipulation that no actual contracts for the 2 acceptable projects should be approved by the City Council until after the results of a forensic audit are complete. Now, if that's not the case, obviously we can talk about if there's timing issues as well. So, because I know some individuals from the city have mentioned, well, Mark, maybe we can't do that because of timing issues. So again, that's all up for discussion. and we're very mindful of timing issues, so we want to be able to work with taxing bodies in the city on those things too. The goal is not to, hold the can until things expire, and then all of a sudden it looks like we're saying one thing, but really we're holding it so none of them can be completed. That's not the case at all. So we want to be able to work with the city on those issues. Number 3, the funds that will remain in TIF number 2, including those tax receipts anticipated to be collected in 2019 for the 2018 tax year should become surplus funds and distributed to the various taxing bodies, which would total approximately $8.55 million. So $8,550,000. And then number 4, discussion should continue in early 2019 regarding the city's proposed Chapter 37 on TIF operations. The application of this chapter should be for both TIF number 1 and TIF number 3. So again, we want to continue to be really good partners with the city. We do have a number of different agreements with the city, a number of different projects that we do collaboratively. We want to maintain a really good relationship. Obviously, I think that's true of all the taxing bodies. We all want to be able to work together. As we were having these talks and everything, the biggest thing was nobody wants anything to end in litigation or anything like that. We all want to make sure that we're moving forward together for the taxpayers, and that we're just being transparent, we're being open, we're being honest as our local governments, and we're just moving forward together and trying to get a lot of these developments going forward. Because again, as the City of DeKalb goes, so goes the county. So again, that's all the statements I wanted to make.
We get set to wrap up here. I want to thank everybody who's in attendance, our elected officials, our various board members, and members of our public, to be able to come forward and share your responses and your feelings and to be heard. That's the point of what we wanted to occur today. So thank you all.
Thank you, Rick. I want to go back to the very start of the meeting and indicate, just for your sake and the sake of the others attending here, the city had received your meeting notice. I had spoken with Mr. Burrow from your office last week. We had corresponded, we had spoken in court and also confirmed via an email between the two of us that your office had conferred with the public access counselor and had confirmed that there wasn't any additional posting requirement. And the city had planned on coming and participating in the forum you had invited us to in good faith. We were notified of the concern from the PAC by the township attorney and related that information to you, but I just want to be clear, the city had fully intended on participating. We had deferred to your office's interpretation on your previous consultation with the PAC on that point. With respect to the comments from Mr. Piotrowski, I think we have a special city council meeting tomorrow night. That's the last planned city council meeting for the year. And one of the challenges that the city faces, as Alderman Jacobson had alluded to, is with the impending end of 2018 upon us and the impending end of TIF 2 upon us, the city council has a finite timeline within which it can take action to approve projects in TIF 2. And so, understanding, I don't know at this point what the council's preference will be. I don't know which projects they will or will not support. But Mr. Piotrowski had outlined kind of a slate of approaches to TIF that address comprehensively a number of different issues, from the Chapter 37 regulations to supporting certain projects to surplusing a certain amount of funding. And I think it's important we all recognize that tomorrow night is essentially the City Council's last opportunity to take that approach, or really to take any approach to TIF 2 project designation in a conservative fashion. So recognizing that in the next 25 hours, I'm not certain that the parties are going to be able to get together and come up with an agreement that everyone is going to be happy with. And being appreciative of you laying out a slate that, on behalf of the county, outlines one possible approach to this. I guess the question I'd like to ask, so the council is aware of the answer, so they have the benefit of it at the time that they're voting tomorrow, if the city acts in a fashion consistent with that, is that going to be viewed by the county, or at least from your perspective, would that be viewed as the city acting in good faith towards furtherance of the objectives that you're discussing? Again, recognizing the city has to take action before the end of the year.
We believe that the people are behind our government. We wanted to give our people a chance to speak, and they have. We wanted to conduct the forum a little bit different than it was today. We appreciate the efforts that everybody's been putting in on this. Our goal is to not fight, but to work together to collaborate every taxing body involved for our entire community to work. So it's speculative to me to say whether that's good faith. That's not for me. Those are the actions that have been laid out from our people here today. Yes, sir.
Yeah, the city attorney just said that the TIF 2 is going to expire, which we all knew. But earlier they said TIF 1 was extended for 12 years with, is that not correct? And 50% of the proceeds from that extension went to the Joint Review Board members. Is that not possible with TIF 2?
I'm sorry, I don't have the knowledge to be able to answer that. Thank you. Okay. Again, thank you everybody for attending. We appreciate your comments, feedback, and working with everyone. Thank you.